No one is invincible, not even Earth's mightiest heroes. Don't believe us? Well, consider the following evidence as we look at the biggest weaknesses of every member of the Marvel Cinematic Universe versions of the Avengers. Saying that someone's strength can also be their weakness is cliché, but it's cliché because it's true, and Iron Man is a perfect example. While Tony Stark's mini-arc reactor has been the source of a number of close calls, it's his need to shoulder the burden that's been his biggest weakness. When the Battle of New York happened in 2012's The Avengers, everything changed for Tony. The knowledge that hostile alien forces were waiting out in the void was too much for him to process without doing something about it.
Stark, you know that's a one-way trip.
Save the rest for the turn, Jay.
While this sense of responsibility helps save the world multiple times, it also feeds Stark's biggest failures. It justifies, in his mind, his deception in Avengers Age of Ultron and leads to the creation of a sentient robot that almost destroys the world. It's also a big part of his motivation to back the Sokovia Accords in Captain America Civil War, sending him on a collision course with Steve Rogers and leaving the world divided. It's true that we tend to expect from the world what we expect from ourselves. So if you're a selfless and courageous patriot who always demands the best from yourself, then you're probably going to expect the best from everyone around you.
I'm not gonna fight you. You're my friend.
And if you're Steve Rogers, you'll be disappointed. A lot. It's this aspect of Steve that helped start so much trouble in Captain America Civil War. Of course, he doesn't see a need for the Sokovia Accords. He expects the best from everyone around him. It's why the deceptions he endures from Black Widow and Nick Fury, who he knows are spies, somehow come as a surprise to him. And it's why he's able to join S.H.I.E.L.D. without noticing the growing threat of Hydra until Fury is nearly dying on his living room floor. Ever since his first big screen appearance in 2011's Thor, the God of Thunder struggles with the fact that he just isn't used to being the loser. The problem with almost always being the most powerful guy in the room is that you might not know what to do once that power can't save you. That's true for Thor as soon as we meet him in his first solo film. He eventually finds the humility to win back Mjolnir and regain his powers, but when he's first made mortal, all he knows to do is try to recapture the hammer.
Hammer!
Yeah, we can tell you're hammered.
Of course, there's also his transformation into the so-called Bro Thor in Avengers Endgame. Although Thor isn't alone in his failure to stop Thanos from killing half the universe in Avengers Infinity War, he lets the weight of everything fall directly on his shoulders. It's what drives him to kill Thanos, and to fall as low as we've ever seen him. One thing that's always been clear about the Hulk is that his biggest weakness, at least in terms of working with a team, is that you're never really sure exactly which Hulk you're going to be dealing with. If you get the wrong one, he's just as likely to smash his teammates as he is to smash the real enemy. While Loki is doubtlessly using outside power to influence the Hulk when he goes wild on the helicarrier in the Avengers, the Hulk isn't someone you have to work that hard to manipulate. While the moment is arguably one of the most hilarious of the film, and the Hulk shows his willingness to lash out at allies when he sucker punches Thor in Grand Central Station. He's one of the 4 Avengers who are assaulted by Scarlet Witch's mental powers in Avengers Age of Ultron, yet he's the only one who goes on a rampage through Johannesburg. And in Thor Ragnarok, there are no witches or warlocks playing with his mind when he chooses to attack Thor in Sakar's arena. Basically, the other guy is unpredictable. As we've seen from Black Widow time and time again, as much as she fights and sacrifices to redeem herself, a powerful part of her is convinced she's not worth saving. It's what Loki tries to exploit in The Avengers, and it's one of the things that kills her in Avengers Endgame. After Loki's plot to manipulate her in The Avengers is revealed, Black Widow continues to be shaken by the experience.
You know what it's like to be unmade.
You know that I do.
And in spite of her selfless heroics in later installments, in Avengers Age of Ultron, she implies that she's as much of a monster as the Hulk and calls the notion of her being an Avenger a dream. While you can hardly call her sacrifice in Endgame a weakness, it seems likely this viewing of herself as a monster is part of what convinces her she should be the one to die on Vormir rather than Hawkeye. Hawkeye is one of the few Avengers whose greatest weakness is more on the physical side of things, as he's limited by his ammo. Without his arrows, Clint is far from helpless. In most of his appearances, we've seen him the equal of many of his fellow Avengers when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. But when it comes to the threats that live in the world of the super, he needs those weapons, and when he runs out, he's in a lot of trouble. In Civil War, he would have been useless without his arrows, and even with them, he was no match for Vision. That's probably why in Avengers Age of Ultron, we learn he's come up with some creative means to extend his ammo. When Scarlet Witch joins the battle against Ultron's drones in Sokovia, that's when we learn her biggest weakness, a lack of confidence. You can hardly blame her for her fear though. Not that long ago, she was on Ultron's side, and she's still pretty new to the superhero business. It takes a pep talk from Hawkeye to get her back on her feet.
If you go out there, you fight, and you fight to kill. Stay in here, you're good. I'll send your brother to come find you, but if you step out that door, you are an Avenger.
But it happens again in Captain America Civil War. When Hawkeye shows up to free Wanda from the Avengers compound, at first it seems like she'd rather stay, and she believes she's dangerous enough to warrant the house arrest Tony Stark has her under. Once more, Clint has to make her face some hard truths before she takes action. Since the death of Vision in Infinity War and her one-sided showdown with Thanos in Endgame, Wanda's lack of confidence may be less of an issue. We'll have to wait and see. Unfortunately, Quicksilver didn't live long enough to get an extended look at what he would have been like as an Avenger, but during his time in Age of Ultron, it's clear the speedster was usually governed by one thing: his rage. It's Pietro's anger at Tony Stark that pits him against the Avengers, and it's eventually what puts him in Ultron's camp. We've seen that fury start to boil up a couple of times, first against Captain America, and then against Hawkeye when the Archer incapacitates Wanda. In the comics, Quicksilver's anger leads him to actually betray the Avengers a number of times. We'll never know if the same would have been true in the films. He's seemed to have mellowed out at least a little, considering both his sacrifice to save Hawkeye and a young Sokovian boy, and his willingness to take a little friendly fire in the arm from a Sokovian cop without punching him in the throat for it. Tony Stark says Vision might become the most powerful of the Avengers before the android comes to life in Age of Ultron, and Vision's entrance into the airport battle in Berlin certainly makes him seem like the most powerful hero there. But in the end, the Mind Stone that was the key to bringing him to life proves his undoing in more ways than one.
Maybe I am a monster. I don't think I'd know if I were one.
First, there's the obvious way. When Thanos rips the gem from the android's head in Infinity War, it kills Vision instantly. Since he isn't one of the victims of Thanos' fateful snap, his death isn't reversed in Endgame. But we see some other ways Vision's reliance on the Mind Stone makes him vulnerable earlier in Civil War. The fact that Wanda's powers come from the Mind Stone is what allows her to overpower Vision when Hawkeye comes to rescue her from house arrest. Later, his over-reliance on the stone, plus his worry for Wanda's injuries, force him to miss his target and blast War Machine, nearly killing him. While James Rhodes' years in the War Machine suit have made him an accomplished Avenger, there's at least one way in which he'll never be Iron Man's equal. He may have a similar suit, but he doesn't have the mind that created them. Rhodey's skills are nothing to sneeze at, even without the suit. As we see in Iron Man 3, his cunning, courage, and marksmanship help him survive fights with multiple extremis-fueled bad guys. The problem is that when he's in the suit and the suit fails him, he doesn't have the technical know-how to compensate. Take his fall in Civil War. Tony Stark finds himself in a similar situation in Iron Man when his push towards the upper atmosphere freezes his suit and causes it to temporarily lose power. Because Tony is an engineer and he knows what the suit can do, he's able to get the armor working again before he's a skid mark. Rhodes doesn't have the same capacity. When Vision accidentally blasts him in Civil War and he falls, his fate is sealed. Ever since he was introduced in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Falcon has proven himself to be a fierce fighter. In Civil War, he goes toe-to-toe with several Avengers, and he makes short work of Crossbone's mercenaries. And in Endgame, he takes down alien monsters twice his size. But without his wings, Sam Wilson is still an accomplished professional soldier whether he can take to the sky or not. But from what we've seen of him so far, his hand-to-hand skills need some work. He isn't much help against the Winter Soldier without his wings, and in his clash with Brock Rumlow, the villain says it best.
You're out of your depth, kid.
While he could probably knock your average person on their butt, without his wings, he can barely keep up. In some ways, when Tony Stark barged into Peter Parker's life in Civil War, it was a gift. In other ways, it's been a burden. While Stark helps to enable Peter to become the best hero he can be, he also imposes a large shadow over Spider-Man's life that the younger hero constantly feels pressured to live up to.
What is he, your ward?
No. I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made-up names. I'm Spider-Man then.
He wants to do nothing but impress his mentor and prove his worthiness as an Avenger. After Iron Man's death, Peter feels the responsibility to fill the void Tony left behind. It's this drive to live up to the legend of Iron Man that leads him to make some questionable decisions. It pushes him to do a lot more than web him up and keep his distance like Tony tells him to in Civil War. It gets him in a number of fights that don't end well in Homecoming, and it drives him to intervene in the arms sale that leads to the Staten Island ferry being blasted in half. And in Far From Home, his feelings of inadequacy make him an easy target for Quentin Beck's manipulations. Imagine the level of distrust you must have toward yourself to not only insist you be stored in cryo-freeze, but to agree that your caretaker will be the guy who, until a few days ago, blamed you for his father's death. That's the situation in which Bucky finds himself in the mid-credits scene of Civil War.
Sure about this?
I can't trust my own mind.
Bucky doesn't trust himself, and with good reason. In spite of being free of Hydra's control and living incognito for 2 years, a man he's never met is able to find the code that unlocks the assassin living in his brain and unleashes him on innocence. We don't even know if Shuri or anyone else in Wakanda was able to cure Bucky of his Hydra conditioning, as it hasn't been mentioned since Civil War. We've mostly only seen Bucky as part of battles with huge opposing armies. What's going to happen when he has to deal with the smaller scale domestic situation? Is he going to be able to trust himself knowing the damage he's capable of? Scott Lang has a massive inferiority complex when it comes to other, more experienced superheroes. We see it as early as his fist fight with Falcon. What we do see of him in Civil War makes it clear that he's utterly starstruck by Captain America.
Captain America?
Mr. Lang?
It's an honor. I'm shaking your hand too long. Wow, this is awesome. Captain America.
But his feelings of inferiority are most clear in Endgame, where his teammates enjoy picking on him because of it. And even though everyone else seems to be embarrassed to even be in the same room as the diminished Bro-Thor, when the Thunder God talks, Scott grins and nods like a little kid listening to his favorite baseball player tell a story. What's so sad about it is how often Scott proves himself to be equal to his teammates. He kicks Falcon's butt in Ant-Man, does some serious damage in Civil War, and he's one of the most pivotal heroes in Endgame, regardless of how the other Avengers talk to him. He's the one who comes up with the idea of using the quantum realm to travel through time. He saves a number of Avengers from drowning when Thanos attacks. He takes out a Chitauri Leviathan by punching it in the face, and he kills Kull Obsidian by stepping on him. So come on, Avengers, give this guy a break. Caring about your family should hardly be seen as a weakness, but the sad truth is when you want Black Panther to make mistakes, the clear route seems to be to attack his family. The first mistake we see T'Challa make is when he dedicates himself to killing Bucky in Civil War. The reason, of course, is because he incorrectly believes Bucky planted the bomb that killed his father. T'Challa fails in his quest for revenge, but it's not for lack of trying.
So I ask you, as both warrior and king, how long do you think you can keep your friends safe from me?
In Black Panther, Killmonger's initial victory over T'Challa at Warrior Falls is only possible because of the very notion of family. The revelation that T'Challa's father killed his own brother and abandoned the young Killmonger in America leads Black Panther to make the bad choice of accepting Killmonger's challenge, which ends with an epic beatdown. Some may argue the point. The sorcerer himself would probably take issue with it, but Stephen Strange's penchant for keeping his own counsel is something that's bound to betray him one of these days. Strange makes a lot of pivotal decisions that seem inexplicable to his allies, and more often than not, he does it without bothering to explain himself. In Doctor Strange, Mordo and Wong both think he's abandoned them when he actually has a plan to trick Dormammu. In Infinity War, he surrenders the Time Stone to Thanos without letting anyone else in on the reason why.
There was no other way.
Of course, in those instances, things ultimately worked out, although not without cost. The Avengers were left dumbfounded for years about his decision on Titan, and things haven't always worked out, like when he transported everyone into the mirror dimension in Doctor Strange, where he made things worse. He and Mordo eventually escape, but ultimately it leads to the death of the Ancient One. We haven't seen Captain Marvel's confidence backfire on her yet, but it's a good bet we're bound to. In the beginning of Endgame, Carol Danvers is convinced that the only reason the Avengers weren't able to defeat Thanos is because she wasn't with them. Her comments rub the group the wrong way, but she doesn't back down. It seems likely that confidence, in part, is what helps keep her a loner. Perhaps one of the biggest differences between the Carol Danvers of the comics and the screen is that, so far, the Captain Marvel of the MCU doesn't seem like much of a team player. When she returns to Earth at the end of the movie, she gets some more fuel for her confidence. Thanos' strongest blow barely phases her, and he's only able to throw her aside because of the Infinity Stones. From what we've seen of her interacting with other heroes, she doesn't seem to like asking for help. Eventually, that's going to get her into trouble. Rocket has some fairly significant character flaws. He's rude, he pushes people away, and he's got an ego the size of Ego's planet. But at the end of the day, Rocket's biggest weakness is simply that he's small. Rocket can be a terrible opponent. He takes on almost all of Yondu's Ravagers in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 by himself. He's a terror with a gun in his hand, and given the right tools and materials, he can make you a high-tech superweapon faster than you can say MacGyver. But catch him without a gun, a high-tech gadget, or at the controls of a spaceship, he's helpless. When he attacks Ronan at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, the Kree barely has to even move to knock Rocket into next week. He's almost completely useless against Gamora early in the movie when they're fighting over Quill. We wouldn't want to make him mad if there's so much as a butter knife nearby, but Marvel's favorite trash panda is, in the end, the size of a Build-A-Bear, and it can be a huge disadvantage.
Honestly, until this exact second, I thought you were Build-A-Bear.
Maybe I am.
Shortly after Endgame opens, we find Nebula playing paper football with Tony Stark on board the Benatar. When she shakes Tony's hand after her victory, this is about the most cordial and social we've seen her. She also practically looks like a starving dog trying to decide whether or not a concerned human handing her food was trustworthy. Like Gamora, Nebula has spent most of her adult life as an assassin under Thanos' thumb. Now that she's free of him, she's going to find herself in something of a new life, and a lot of it will be challenging. When Quill comments on how bad Nebula is lying in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, it's more than a joke. Of course she's bad at lying. She spent her whole life outside anything approaching a normal social situation. Assuming Nebula is planning on becoming a regular member of the Guardians, she'll likely find it difficult to figure out how or who to be.